case you're ever wondering about the last 25 years of evolution of NASCAR.
Which, when I left the sport, I learned from Bill Lawrence, who was, one of the drivers on my series, and when I was interviewing him one time, and he had this 10-year gap in his racing resume.
I know the story. Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, Bill, you were out of the sport for a long time. What got you back in? He said, I went to a race. Came home with a race car. Once it's in your blood, it's very, very much in your blood. And so I worked very hard to stay away from the sport.
This is why we only go to 2 races a year.
Yes.
Welcome back to another episode of This and That, a coffee chat with the Harra Team.
Good morning, afternoon, whatever time you happen to be watching this.
That's my dad, Scott. I'm Kelly.
Introduction, interrupt us.
Yeah. Let's see, we have part 2 of Life with Horses in Arizona today.
Yes.
Some more economic updates from you.
Yes.
Some sports and pop culture things that happened in the last week. So we've got a full slate.
We do, and we do indeed. So
I don't have anything else to say before we get started.
Happy holidays.
Almost.
Well, it's kind of, we're in between Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's. Hey, it's nearly bowl season. And when it's bowl season, we know it's the holidays.
True.
Okay. Do you want me to start with the economic news?
That sounds good.
All right. So we've talked about this graph before, and this one's fairly scary from the Federal Reserve. But total consumer credit increased by $19.24 billion in October to a record $5.11 trillion. So I will put up the incredibly scary chart, but basically from 2011, we have just been on a 45-degree trajectory on debt with a brief drop down with the stimulus money from the pandemic, where people were paying off debt with that money,
right?
And they didn't have anything else to spend it on because they weren't going anywhere, they weren't doing anything, they're streaming Netflix all day long.
Yeah.
And then that quickly rebound back to that trajectory that we've been on. So
is this early holiday spending?
Oh no, this has just been a long-term for the last 13 years spending.
So are we expecting this to spike again in the next couple of months, potentially, or?
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. The other big news, there's 3 items here. The other ones is that the U.S. job growth rebounded in November. Remember, October was extremely small number, and we kind of bounced back to what we had been seeing in November. Not all the way up to where it was in 2023, but still continuous job growth in the market. Now, those numbers have been highly corrected later, so.
Right. But we had talked that October was probably going to be an anomaly because of the hurricanes and whatnot. So
you are correct. And then we did talk about the consumer price index a little bit and whatnot. And so I'm just going to follow up on it. I mean, there's no big change in the news. We're still looking at 2.6% inflation without seasonal adjustments. But what I found very interesting is how much the drop in energy prices that occurred actually drew down that number. And so if energy prices had just remained flat, we would have seen an even higher inflation number. So again, the Fed is still a little trepidatious.
English as a foreign language is English.
Wary,
thank you.
Let's make this easier.
Yes. And so there's now indications that there might be fewer Federal Reserve rate drops coming up.
Okay.
Again, with that healthy job number again, it's like, we don't have to overcook the markets right now.
Right.
The producer price index came back with an increase of 2.4%, and they're looking at an overall for the year of a 3.3% increase in the producer price index when we get through December. So, not the 8 and 9% that we were seeing, but still not down in that 2% range. So those were a few of the highlights that came out this last week. It'll be interesting to see if we get any preliminary holiday sales figures in. I know that Black Friday and Cyber Monday saw increased growth over previous years, so it seems like the public is still in the buying mood.
Right. And we don't have our seasonal or temporary jobs report.
No, I haven't
yet.
seen a report on that yet, so I'll keep on looking to see if I can find it. Hopefully the person that mentioned it will then follow up on it. And
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, steady as she sails, we're still looking for mortgage rates to come down some. There was a real response in the market when they dropped to the low 6s, both on home sales, on refinances, all of that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see, if we just see a little bit of movement in those mortgage rates, what the housing market's going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. Well, on to part 2 of life with horses in Arizona.
Okay.
Last week we talked about some of my favorite things about having horses here. This week is for some of my not so favorite things of having horses. And like with most things, when we talk about the benefits of the weather, there's also the cons of the weather. And so summer heat is definitely a tough one.
It's hot, it's humid.
You can still get out and ride in the summer here. It just has to be pretty much in the dark. So you're either riding early in the morning before the sun comes up or as it's coming up in those first couple of hours, or after it goes down at 9 o'clock at night, something like that. We also really carefully monitor how much water the horses are drinking because it's so easy to have them get dehydrated, and it happens so fast. I feel like when we were in Oregon, if a horse stopped drinking, we had kind of some time to realize that they weren't drinking and get more fluids in them and all that. And here I feel like it's a matter of hours. And if you haven't caught it, if they stop drinking after breakfast and you're just catching it at dinner time, that might be a vet call at that point because they've already lost so much fluid in that time during the day. So that can be a challenge. When we had Flash, our older horse, that was especially a challenge with him. So any horse that's, picky about water or anything like that, you got to be really careful about watching and making sure that they're still drinking. And
most of the time it's so dry here that even if they're sweating, you can't tell because it dries so fast, it evaporates.
Yeah,
so
you
quickly.
kind of have to assume that they're sweating basically all day and that they need to be replacing that.
Yeah.
We don't use automatic water systems, so we can see how much the buckets go down. And in the summer, some of our horses have like their favorite buckets for whatever reason. It's different depending on the horse. But in the summer, it's like, okay, this one is this horse's favorite bucket. Let's put water in this bucket and give it to this horse because that should get them to drink if they haven't been drinking. So just that water consumption and heat and keeping them cool. We run fans basically from when we go out and feed in the morning till at least when we feed in the evening, if not later. Often we'll go out and do like a later night check, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And sometimes we'll be turning the fans off then because that's when it's finally cool enough. So fans, lots of water. If it's really hot on those occasional like 110 plus days, we'll get them out and hose them off. So just watching for that heat and dehydration issues. And
Do you do electrolytes and that type of thing?
so a little bit of that, some like grain mashes to also get them drinking with that. If they look like they haven't been drinking as much water as we like. Soaked hay sometimes to get water into them that way. So yeah, kind of a combination of all those things. Salt added to their mashes. Yeah.
Okay.
So for those like 4 months of the summer when it's really hot, that's a constant reassessing.
Everyday, daily process.
Yeah, of what's going on with water and heat and all of that. So that's the challenge. Along with that, I think our second biggest challenge is the flies, because it's just so warm for so much of the year. We don't have the deep freezes like we did in Oregon to kind of help knock them out for, a good chunk of the year. And so like right now we're still dealing with a lot of flies. It's mid-December and
Frost warning tonight.
yeah, well, we need a few of those because we're still having a lot of flies. So figuring out the fly management, and that often means reapplying like fly spray and whatnot, because again, it's so warm that you're applying it in the morning and then you've got to reapply it kind of midday again. And then this is something that we did not have in Oregon, and it applies, as far as I know and have heard from our vets, more to like the southwest area, is Habronema. Basically, it's certain, more or less, I might not have this perfect, but more or less certain flies that are basically like lay their eggs on the horses, and some horses basically have an autoimmune reaction to them, and rather than just killing the larva and whatnot, they encapsulate in these like calcium things those eggs that the flies are laying, and then the like tissue of the body tries to like form around it, but it can't because it's these calcium things. And it basically causes the open wounds to happen. Of course, the flies love that. They go back to them. You get more eggs in there that get encapsulated, and you have this constant cycle of this problem. I've asked the vets how often they see this, and they said they figure it's about 10% of horses, give or take. I don't think anyone's really tracking this, but they think roughly 10% of horses here have this problem, but it's a higher percentage of their calls, especially in the summer, where they're basically having to go and like dig these things out. And I have lots of really gross photos of this on my phone, because we have one horse who has this challenge, and basically if she rubs her fly mask off and goes half a day without her fly mask on because we weren't out there to put it back on, she's going to have a new spot opening up. If they get any like cuts or scrapes or anything like that, we use a lot of SWAT as the product to help, and in particular the pink one, not the clear one, to help keep flies off, and that works really well. But again, if it gets rubbed off at any point in the day, the flies are back on it. So that's a constant challenge with her. It gets a little bit better in the winter, but all summer we are battling this. None of the other horses have the problem. They can have flies all over them, not an issue. So it's just certain horses, but when you have a horse that has this problem, it's really tough. We are able to do some of the managing. If it gets bad, we have to call a vet out to take care of it, basically.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you guys were actually talking about maybe sending her back up to Oregon.
Yeah.
Because it's so bad for her.
Yeah, and for her, she gets them on her face. That's where they seem to go for her. I think she also tends to rub her face on a lot of things, so I think she gets those like little micro scratches on her face, and that's just enough for them, even with the full face fly masks. We also will get some of the fly masks that are a little bit like bigger and puffier out, because we've noticed that they will, if there's an open wound, and the fly mask is in contact with it, they will actually sit on the outside of the fly mask and go through it.
Oh, wow.
And so, like right now, she's got one on her face that we're putting SWAT on the outside of her fly mask to help keep them away from that area where it's basically in contact with the wound. So that's just a constant process of how do you keep the flies away. I know some people like misters, but then you have more moisture added, and I think that actually makes the fly situation worse, which is why on the heat side we don't use misters, we just use the fans. The fans also tend to help with the flies.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, it also means that you have to figure out what your manure removal situation is. In Oregon, we could kind of just go dump it further away from the barn. It wasn't a huge issue. We
Right.
weren't creating a mass of flies from doing that. And I think even if we had more acreage per horse, I think we would still, unless we were talking, 100 acres, we would still need to get it off the property, because some people will like till it into their footing and whatnot, and it creates such a fly problem. And so we use a dumpster from Waste Management, and they come pick it up every other week, and it gets the manure off the property. But if you don't have a ton of acreage to be able to dump your manure somewhere else, you also are going to have to address that to help address the fly issue.
Right.
So that's been an interesting challenge that we didn't really know about and didn't expect, particularly on the Habro side of things when we moved down here, because it was not an issue in Oregon. And then I think my third one on the challenges is the sand colic issue. We had more clay soil up in Oregon.
Way more clay soil.
Here it's dirt and sand.
Yeah.
And so figuring out, one, clearing it. A lot of people use psyllium. We tend to use flaxseed. We grind up flaxseed and put it in their grain. And that seems to help quite a bit. But figuring out how you're clearing sand and making sure that they're not getting a bunch of sand in their system, because they can sand colic from that. I know my mom talked to a vet at one point that likes to do autopsies on horses after they die. And I guess at one point he opened up a horse and found, I don't remember the exact number, but it was like 50 pounds or 100 pounds or something like that of sand in the horse's gut. And that was just not getting cleared out. So figuring out how to clear it, figuring out how you can try to reduce the intake. So we try to feed like in bins, or if we don't have a bin, in a hay net, even though that's less ideal for how they're supposed to be eating, just to try to keep stuff off the ground and less getting mixed in with the sand for them to then pick up.
Even though you have matted stalls where you feed, there's just enough sand that blows in and whatnot that
it's it's in the air, it's everywhere. And so figuring out how to minimize the intake and then how to clear it. What's been really interesting is that my mom also found a study out of somewhere in Europe, maybe Ireland, something like that, that was looking into feeding and like what they were feeding the horses to not have this issue. And they were finding that grass hay was doing a good job of clearing it, as long as they had a high enough intake of grass hay versus like an alfalfa or something like that. And I think about Sebastian, who I always joke is like our garbage gut horse of our herd here. He eats anything and everything. It goes in his mouth first, and then he decides whether or not he should eat it. And every time the vet comes out, they're always basically they're listening for sand to try to see if they hear anything. And the first few times they came out and checked him, they're like, yeah, no sand. And I was like, are you sure about that? And it kept happening, no sand, no sand. Well, his diet is 2 to 3 flakes, twice a day of Bermuda, no alfalfa. And so I think that large intake of Bermuda is actually helping to keep him sand free, even though he eats
Everything.
yeah, lots of stuff that he probably shouldn't be eating. And then I think about Flash, who was our old guy that died last year, and was having a hard time eating the Bermuda, and so was on a much heavier alfalfa diet. And we were having a real challenge of clearing sand out of him. And so I think that diet part also maybe does play a role in it. And so if you have horses that don't need large amounts of alfalfa and can do more of the grass hay, that potentially can help. It seems to help for ours and making sure that the sand clears.
Excellent.
So yeah, I think so. Summer heat, flies, sand colic are probably the three biggest challenges, I would say, of being
They're
here.
particularly different from Oregon.
From being in
or,
Oregon.
You know, if you lived in the northern states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things that we didn't necessarily fully expect or realize would be a challenge here.
Although there's probably some things that we don't talk about that, like our challenges in Oregon, that aren't here. I mean, we talked about the weather and whatnot, but I mean, having, you know, wet pastures and whatnot all you know, for 9 months out of the year, and what that does to the feet and, you know, that type of thing. You don't have to really worry about that here.
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah.
So that is a benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So, yeah.
Well, and then you have something else next week on the equestrian front.
Yeah, so next week we'll talk about some things to consider as far as the home buying part of potentially moving here. If you're thinking about buying horse property here, some things to be on the lookout for, to keep an eye out on, and just to consider when you're going through that process.
All right. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
If I remember, well, I'll put up a little scan code to look at equestrian properties here in southern Arizona.
Yes, we do have a spot on our website already set up for
Yep.
you to look into equestrian properties here. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. What do we have next?
Do we want to finish off our season of motorsports?
Yes. Sadly, it is over.
It is over.
But you know, they gave us, at least for the first part of the race, a pretty good, you know.
I feel like it was entertaining throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we continued our tradition of getting up at 6 a.m. to watch it. Mm-hmm. I can't remember about the last couple of years if we did it both of the last 2 years, but I remember in 2021 we did. Mm-hmm. Because that was a wild one.
Yes, it was, and we watched it live.
Not to get into the controversy of that, but I think like one of the last 2 years also we were up at 6 a.m. So this has kind of become a new Abu Dhabi tradition to get up very early.
So with McLaren grabbing pole and second in qualifying, it looked like they had pretty much locked up the Constructors' Championship, especially with Charles Leclerc having to take a 10-grid penalty for a new battery unit. Yeah. Because that failed during practice, I believe. So they knew going into qualifying he was already, and then he had some issues during qualifying, so he started 19th, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And it just looked like it was done and dusted. Yeah. And then comes world champion Max Verstappen, first turn, decides to take out Oscar Piastri.
He at least made the race interesting.
He made the race very interesting. Lando ended up driving missed the carnage because he was out in front of it and drove off. But Charles Leclerc took full advantage of the chaos and mayhem on the first lap, and he picked up 11 spots.
I think 8 spots on the first lap, and then in the first handful of laps was up a few more.
Yeah, so he boldly went through holes that people didn't know existed, and
or maybe it was 11, 19th to 8th.
Yeah, it was 19th to 8th.
And then a few more in the next,
Yeah, and tremendous drive on his part. And all of a sudden,
It was an interesting race again.
yes. And, Oscar had to, work his way back through the field. And Lando didn't have anybody providing defense for him, which Oscar would have done
Right.
from that position. Max got a 10-second penalty, which he didn't care for a whole lot.
Shocking.
Yeah. And then under caution, Oscar runs into the back of, I think it was the Williams car,
Yeah, it was
Colapinto,
Colapinto.
and earned himself a 10-second
I
penalty.
think that was like right as they went back green.
They're about ready to go to green, and some of the cars accelerated and then slowed down, and he was still accelerating when
Yeah.
Colapinto slowed down and ran into the back of him. And
Yeah, that kind of ruined his charge back
yes,
through the field. I mean, he still finished in the points, but barely.
yeah, and again, it further, basically, if
If one of the Ferraris had passed Lando, it would have
been tied, right?
I think depending on where Oscar was and where the bonus point for fastest lap was, yeah,
Right.
it was all right in that.
And of course, Kevin Magnussen captured the fastest lap after he got yeeted by Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah,
It wasn't intentional
No.
because Bottas had locked up, and he had locked up for a good 40 meters
yeah,
before he sent
yeah, right into the
Magnussen
side.
into the next dimension.
Yeah,
And so that ruined Kevin Magnussen's race. And so at the end, they're like, hey, Kevin, it's your last race. Go get fastest lap here. Let's put some soft tires on and go do that. So lots of very interesting things going on throughout the field.
yeah. Still a close battle for that sixth position, which Alpine ended up holding on to
Yes.
over Haas and over RB.
Yep.
So that was
And Gasly's last 3 races and very strong finishes
other
allowed
than
him
the
to
DNF.
nip
Yeah. Hulkenberg.
Hulkenberg for 10th place in the Drivers' Championship.
It'll be interesting to see if that Alpine improvement continues over into next season because they had a very different car in these last 4 or 5 races.
At least Gasly did.
Yeah. Than they did in the first 80% of the season.
Yes.
So if they continue this on, I think they will at least be in the battle of, maybe not the fastest cars, but right in that second group of fastest cars.
And Aston Martin had a little bit of a resurgence this weekend, so maybe the Adrian Newey effect is starting to be felt. So you have potential of fairly rapid improvement for Aston Martin. We've seen Alpine figure it out here towards the end of the year. We saw consistent, steady growth from the Haas team all season long. And quite frankly, the last 2 races, the Kick Sauber car has actually been competitive, where most of the season
It was dead last.
it was Formula 2.
It was Formula 20. I mean, it was so much slower.
I mean, you got Formula A and Formula B. They weren't even in Formula B. So that's going to be very interesting going into next year. That best of the rest group
yeah.
and what it's going to look like. Mercedes was just
I still think that they have such a small window where that car works, and they've got to figure out how to make that window bigger
yes,
and how to work on more tracks and more conditions.
yeah. Because when they're on, they're competitive with the top 3 teams.
Yeah.
When they're not on, they're fighting with the Haases and the Alpines.
Yeah.
And Aston Martins. It'll be interesting to see how Red Bull rebounds. They no longer have Adrian Newey.
Right.
They were not a great car unless Max Verstappen was driving it, and
Right.
even that was sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, he only finished, I know he had a 10-second penalty, but he only finished 6th in this race.
Right.
Which is,
And it didn't look like he was
no,
going to be competitive over the long run
no.
with the top 3.
And We have rumors, but yet to hear an official confirmation of who's actually going to be in that second Red Bull seat for next year.
So earlier today was, or right now, was testing
Right.
for the next year.
Yuki's in the Red Bull, but we're hearing rumor of
Liam Lawson.
Lawson taking the seat.
Yeah.
I would not be happy if I was Yuki.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with how the test goes today.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
There might be that last bit of data that they want before they make the decision.
Yeah.
So a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, for seats that are supposedly done.
Yeah, and Haas has an all-new lineup next year, somewhat. Ollie Berman did do a couple starts in the Haas this year. Once when Kevin Magnussen was sick and once when Kevin Magnussen was suspended.
Yeah.
So he had a couple starts there, but...
Ocon.
Thank you. Albon and Alcon.
Those are interchangeable people to you?
Yes.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make sure I had the right one. So Ocon's coming over from Alpine.
Yeah.
So 2 brand new drivers, a car that's been on the way up,
Yeah.
new partnership with Toyota. So Toyota has, because Ollie Berman was no longer considered a rookie after running 3 races this year, 2 with Haas and 1 with Ferrari. So he couldn't drive in today's test. So Toyota has a Japanese driver driving for Haas, and that's just the start of that new partnership that Haas has developed with Toyota Racing. I don't know if that's a longer-term plan for Toyota to get back into the sport as an engine builder.
Right.
You know, obviously Haas is very closely tied to Ferrari. Ollie Berman is still a Ferrari driver.
Right.
Let's be clear about that. So, but nonetheless, Toyota is starting to show its influence on the Haas team
Yeah.
by picking a driver to test today.
Yep.
So, I'm kind of curious to see what the reports are out of the testing.
Yeah.
I don't know how meaningful they are, but
Right.
it doesn't hurt to get an idea of where things are going.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what the development looks like over the winter break here and then where they all come out at that first race of the new year.
Yeah. I love this part of the development cycle
Yeah.
for a new set of rules, which is now an old set of rules, because everybody is just maximizing the most that they can out of the car. And so, you know, the top teams don't have a whole lot of room. The mid-pack keeps on getting closer and closer to the top group.
Right.
And it's just whoever gets that last little bit figured out before everybody else makes a big difference in the standings.
You saw that with McLaren this year.
McLaren was terrible the first, 3 races of the year?
Yeah, they've had some big updates that have worked.
Yes.
You know, Ferrari had some big updates that didn't work and they had to go back and
Yeah.
they had later updates that worked, but
And Red Bull figured out that a year ago in Barcelona, they brought updates that actually hurt the car.
yeah.
But because of Max's incredible driving ability, he masked those
Right.
problems, whereas Checo was like, this isn't working right.
Yeah.
But that led them down a whole series of upgrades that they wrongly thought were going to help the car, where actually they're taking it in the wrong direction,
Yeah.
and to the point where even Max can't.
Well, and they were so far ahead on the development curve at that point that it didn't really matter if
Right, they were still beating everybody.
Yeah, if it didn't work great for Checo, who cares? They're
Yes, he's
so
still
far,
finishing second.
Yeah, they're so far ahead that it didn't matter.
Yeah,
This year it mattered
Yep.
as they finish third with the drivers' champion, which just seems wild. But
yeah.
it was a good season. I mean, I think we got lucky this year with NASCAR having a good season, Formula One having a good season. IndyCar was close up until the end there as well. So
It's been a good year of racing.
yeah,
It'll be interesting with IndyCar's new TV contract and new condensed schedule, how that's going to impact teams and whether the better financed teams are going to really kind of emerge, because when you have a more spread out schedule like IndyCar used to and more weekends off, that gave teams time to fix cars and make adjustments and whatnot. Whereas with that tighter, more compressed schedule, I think it's going to hurt the smaller teams in their ability to produce competitive cars.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, they've also got their charter system going into effect. So with having the charters, maybe the, I don't know, incentive for sponsors to join will be a little bit better, and maybe that will help bring some of those smaller teams up.
Well, and the TV contract has to help, because every one of those races is going to be on broadcast TV. You don't have to have a sports subscription package or the right channels on your cable service. They're all going to be over air, so there's no reason why you can't, unless you live in a place that you don't get a Fox channel. But and the other kind of somewhat exciting thing we learned today is that the ARCA Menards West Series is coming to our little Tucson Raceway on April 5th this year. So we'll definitely have to get tickets for that. And,
it's a smaller track than Phoenix.
Oh, way smaller.
And so I feel like those cars will be entertaining on this track.
Yes.
It's the size of the track that they need, and those drivers can be interesting.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. And Tucson Raceway Park, at least that's what they used to call it, I don't think it's called that anymore, has a progressive banking track. And so two-wide racing is very easy to do on that track, because the faster inside line doesn't have as much banking as the next line. And so those two things offset each other. And so you can see cars running side by side for many laps in a row. If you have a faster car stuck behind those guys, do we take it three wide and try to go outside, or do we just patiently wait till they've sorted out, and as the laps count down, they kind of lose their patience. So
it's not the most patient group of drivers.
No.
And it's always an interesting mix, because you've either got the real old guys that like never made it all the way up to the big touring series, or you've got the really young guys that are on their way up. They just are, 15 years old or whatever. And so you've got the mix of, experience levels and, how long they've been in these cars. And
and for some of the guys, especially the older guys, this is their hobby. And so they have a lot of money. They don't know what to do with it, so they buy a race team, and then they go racing. And so they're not always necessarily the most talented, nor not always the most experienced. Well, some of them are.
Or tactful.
Whereas these kids are often, like farm kids of some of the bigger teams. They put them into these rides to see how they do and have them work through the NASCAR pyramid to see if they eventually can make it to the Cup Series. So it's definitely part of the farm program. We were actually talking about that when I was with NASCAR. How to use some of these regional tours as feeder series, more so than they were being used at the time. I mean, obviously Greg Biffle came off of our series and whatnot, but having the Cup teams actually more financially involved with teams at the regional level and whatnot, you're seeing that now.
That sounds more like your baseball model, your hockey model, those sorts of things.
That was exactly what we were talking about at the time, way back in the late 90s, was, here's how baseball works. Here's how baseball works. And there's this investment to develop these drivers. And if we're going to support the local tracks, which many of them were struggling at the time, here's a way to help support them by having the top teams develop a farm system.
Yeah.
It's not exactly perfect by any means, but it's there.
Is that part of why they went to just the two, the East and the West, as opposed to having the 8 smaller regional series back when you were with NASCAR?
No, it had more to do with the, again, the shorter tracks were struggling and coming up with the purses to support the sanction fees and the purses and whatnot. And it became, you had the .com recession that impacted NASCAR quite a bit. And then you had the Great Recession, which further impacted NASCAR actually quite a bit. And it just was no longer financially sustainable to have the 8 regional tours that we had. And so they really just scaled those back. And then over time, the ARCA Menard series grew up. It was the old, Busch series on the East Coast and the Winston West series. I'm going way back in time on the West Coast. Well, NASCAR bought out ARCA, took the names and handed it to those 2 series with Menards as the title sponsor. And it just kind of evolved that way. But they're definitely running, the old Cup style cars. Whereas our series was super late models. This is more like what they're going to be driving with the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series. Although each of those are very different vehicles, this is at least more similar to those than what we had on most of our regional tours.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. NASCAR history with Scott.
Yeah, there you go. In case you're ever wondering about the last 25 years of evolution of NASCAR.
Which, when I left the sport, I learned from Bill Lawrence, who was, one of the drivers on my series. And when I was interviewing him one time, and he had this 10-year gap in his racing resume.
I know the story. Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, Bill, you were out of the sport for a long time. What got you back in? He said, I went to a race, came home with a race car. Once it's in your blood, it's very, very much in your blood. And so I worked very hard to stay away from the sport.
This is why we only go to 2 races a year.
Yes, because it's very easy to get sucked back into it. I still am very passionate about the sport of particularly stock car racing, and it'd be very easy for me to get back into it, but I had other career things I needed to work on and accomplish.
Yeah.
And, now I'm kind of getting back to, now I'm in real estate, and so I can't be traveling every weekend to a race to either as an official or as a media person or whatever role I might end up taking, because we do a lot of work in real estate on the weekends.
Yes.
So we just go to a couple races a year so I don't get sucked back into the vortex.
Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah. Well, anyway, enough of that.
We had college football conference playoffs or championships this weekend.
Yes.
Which
you have a old Pac-12 observation.
Yeah, the 2 teams that were in their new conference championships both won. So
yeah, and the Pac-12 was just not a very good football conference, was it?
They just couldn't compete with all the rest of them.
No. Just because they played at night after everybody else went to bed, and they often would knock each other out of competition. So Oregon won the Big Ten championship. Fairly convincingly over Penn State. I mean, Penn State hung in there, but you never felt like Oregon was in trouble during that game.
Yeah, I would have liked them to put him away a little bit more, a little sooner, but it was.
And then Arizona State, who was picked to finish last in the Big 12 by the media in preseason, handily.
Yeah, that was a comfortable.
That was comfortable early on over Iowa State.
Yeah.
So both of those teams get a bye in the first round of the newly expanded college football playoffs.
And we all get to enjoy Alabama complaining about not making it into the playoffs.
Yeah.
You can tell we have lots of sympathy for some of these schools.
Our West Coast bias shows through.
We're real sick and tired about hearing about the SEC schools and the East Coast schools and
having had to put up with the very real East Coast bias that is in the media when it comes to sports, particularly college football sports. This is kind of nice. We're enjoying this. It might not last forever, but we're going to enjoy it this year.
Yeah. Just rub it in a little while we can.
Yeah, exactly. So, so bowl games and playoffs and all that good stuff.
Georgia went to yet another overtime game to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. They get a bye, but...
Yeah, when you play such a long game the time before, it has an impact on the following game.
Yeah.
It really does. So it'll be fun.
And I am glad, we talked about this a little bit off camera, but when they only had the 4-team playoffs and you had the losing team in your conference championship then get dropped out of the playoffs and fall below the seed of someone who didn't play in that.
Right.
That always just did not seem right to me. And so I'm glad with this ranking that like Penn State was still ahead of Ohio State, even though they lost this game.
Right.
Because they played another game. I feel like you should not get to jump
against a very high caliber team.
Now, maybe if you get blown out, okay, yeah, sure, I could understand that. But if you play a close game against another team that is also very good, you shouldn't get jumped by someone else who had a bye week.
Right.
And so I'm glad that when they did the seeding this time, Ohio State didn't jump Penn State as an example.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, losing to Michigan didn't exactly help their case, but, you know.
No, that didn't help Ohio State's case at all.
So, yeah, we've got a few weeks until those games, but in the meantime, bowl games will be starting.
The Hamburger Helper Bowl is just right around the corner. And no, there isn't really a Hamburger Helper Bowl, but it's that's the kind of...
Yeah, maybe for next week you'll have to pull together your bowl game or not.
I will pull together a bowl game or not for next week because that'll be perfect timing heading into the bowl season. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's time to watch a lot of football, and we're getting close to our crazy European soccer schedule as well.
That is one of my favorite parts about the holiday season is the Premier League goes nuts.
I mean, there's Boxing Day, but there's more than just Boxing Day.
Yes, it's Boxing Day plus games a day apart after that. Give them one day off. That's all they need. Let's roll them back out there. It was interesting because I think it was StuntPegg. It seems like there's another part of her name, YouTube channel, British gal. She did a YouTube video. I'll link it. I'll find it. Don't worry. You know how good I am with names.
This does not sound like a right name, but we'll get there.
She's a big YouTube soccer sensation in England, and she did a story about the fixture congestion problem that all of English soccer has, but also in particular the Premier League and all the games, and how it's a tradition on Boxing Day for Brits to basically watch Premier League soccer. And how all the rest of the major European leagues, they're on Christmas break. And there was a discussion about, especially if you're not English and you play in the Premier League, which a lot of foreign players do, they don't get an opportunity to fly home and spend the holidays with their family.
Yeah.
Because the congestion of fixtures is so great, you just can't fly out and fly back. You can't go to Spain and then come back.
Not that it's that long of a flight.
No, yeah, but it's there's going to be training going on and other things like that, and so what
family has to fly in rather than them going to family.
Exactly, and so what she was raising is, should England have a Christmas break or a holiday break, a winter break, whatever you want to call it?
Mm-hmm.
She didn't answer the question.
She
but she just kind of, here's tradition and why we love it. Here's what all the other European countries do and why they love it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but we love it.
Yeah. We can get up at, 7 and be watching games all morning.
Yep. We very much enjoy that. So.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Leicester City in another video, but I do like the impact that the new coach has had on the team.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We're not winning games a whole lot yet, but we're not losing as many games as we were. So, give them time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any other sports items?
I don't believe I do.
Okay. The Eras Tour wrapped up this weekend.
We're going to talk Taylor Swift.
Also.
Okay.
So, for the F1 Swiftie overlap crowd, which is a bigger crowd than you probably think, it was a tough weekend. Two things ended at once.
Yeah.
And, plus you had the Hamilton leaving Mercedes, the Sainz leaving Ferrari, all of that going on. But yes, so Eras Tour wrapped up in Vancouver this weekend.
Okay.
They were filming again the last 3 shows, and so it'll be interesting to see what comes out. Because obviously she already did the tour movie from like the first half of the tour, basically. So are we going to have a part 2? Is this to include the new music? Is this like a documentary of the tour? I don't know. But they were filming again, so it will be interesting to see what comes of that.
All right.
Hopefully, if the pattern continues, we'll get her last 2 Taylor's version albums next year.
Okay.
She's been releasing those 2 at a time every other year. So 21, 23, both had 2, so 25 in theory.
Right. Okay.
We'll get the last 2. We'll see. Still waiting on that Reputation Taylor's version, but I'll be patient. So yeah, that was the end of that. Almost 2 years later, and $2 billion of sales later. 10 million fans.
That boggles the mind, the level of success that tour had. I was telling Kelly, I was saying, it's a little bit reminiscent of Kenny Chesney and his stadium tours that he did a number of summers in a row. But that was, 10, 12 a year, and that was it, and yes, they filled 50,000, 60,000 seat stadiums, but that's still...
This was 150 shows over a year and 9 months, basically.
Right.
That filled all of them.
Yes. So just phenomenal. 10
million people roughly was the number of people across all of those.
I wonder how many of that 10 million saw 3 or more of the concerts.
Probably some of them, yes. Well, and how many more would have gone if they could have gotten tickets to it?
Right.
I don't know if you probably didn't see this, but I believe it's the stadium in Munich that she was playing. Mm-hmm. Outside has this like big grassy hill, and there were like tens of thousands more people that filled that hill unticketed seats that watched her
on a big screen.
No, from the hill.
From the hill, you'd look in.
A little bit like the track at Phoenix with that hill in the back, that sort of setting, except they didn't sell tickets to it. It was literally people having picnics in a park type of setting.
Wow. That
filled this whole hillside for all of her shows in Munich as well. Vancouver, they sold behind the stage seats with no view, basically, at like $16 a pop. And they set up screens Couldn't see her necessarily the whole time, but
You could hear her.
you could hear her, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, how many more, if they had done that on all of the shows, how many more seats could you have sold with that too? I mean, that was a big tour with a big financial impact to all the places.
Yeah, huge economic impact.
Yeah.
That tour had in all the different places where she had concerts. You know, I'll be curious to see how long she waits to do something similar again.
That's kind of been my question is like, okay, what do you do
Next.
Yeah. What do you do next? Because in some ways this has felt to me like a greatest hits type of tour. Mm-hmm. But it was created because she had 4 new albums that she hadn't toured on because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, it sort of makes sense to be like, okay, if I'm touring 4 albums, I might as well tour the rest and throw them all in there. But yeah, what do you do next? Do you go back to a normal, here's my new album, here's my tour for this album?
It seems a little mundane.
Exactly.
You know, it's like once you've done
3-hour shows with 45 songs that covered your whole...
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what you do next.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Bruce Springsteen, and, you know, again, you there's a large number of people that, you know, that was my 12th Springsteen concert and mm-hmm. that type of thing. And what, you know, every day it's a different set. Every concert is a different set. So it's not the same concert over and over again. He literally sits down and writes it down on a piece of paper, and then everybody gets a copy in the band of what the play set is for that particular concert. And that's, you know, how he enjoys his music.
Yeah.
And so, you know, does she do that?
I mean, that could be interesting because she already has the 2-song acoustic set where she plays something new every day. Mm-hmm. The problem is she's so much like choreography and like show performance going on with the rest of the set. So then the question would be, okay, do you drop that and just kind of strip it all down to
strip it down to the
band
essentials.
And the music, and then you can come up with something new every day.
And, you know, maybe you play some smaller venues when you do that also to make it more intimate. I mean,
that would go over well, but
well, I mean, it's less you know, profitable, obviously. You know,
I don't think that's a particular concern for her.
No, I mean, exactly. But again, you're trying to figure out what might, you know, reach her and inspire her to do something that where she's getting the energy back that she wants to get. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it's a Vegas residency. Yeah. I mean, you know, Jan, but I mean, you're not touring, you're not flying all over the world. Right. But again, I think the Springsteen model might be enticing to her because her catalog's certainly big enough that she could do that easily. Yeah. And, you know, and then no 2 concerts are the same. And so people, you know, on the Springsteen side, they compare the playlists of, you know, what songs do you play on in your concert that you saw, and, you know, here's the ones that you played on my concert.
And you had that with the surprise songs. I mean,
true.
You know, you had
but that was only 2 songs.
And and it still was drawing tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of streamers. There was someone who basically went and like was compiling all the streams and then would go live on like Instagram, YouTube, whatnot, and would pull in like the best streams from the people in the crowd. And she did this for, you know, like all of these concerts. And so you would get people watching these streams, even though it's the same thing other than the surprise songs. And just on those 2 songs, there's comparison on, you know, what did you get? So if you made this a whole set list where it was different every time, that would be interesting. Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure because she is a very shrewd business person, that she will figure out what works for her and what works for her audience, because she's very in touch with the audience, it seems, and knows how to push all the right buttons.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. I have family and friends coming into town, so that's my looking forward to.
Yes, you do.
They all decided to come like at the same time too. I'm like, okay, could you guys spread this out a little bit more? You don't all have to be here like in the same 5 days.
No.
But, like 3 different groups of friends and family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you have fun with that.
Thanks. You doing anything fun coming up?
I am playing in a charity golf tournament tomorrow.
Oh.
Fundraiser, I'm pretty sure, and I really should look at my notes, a food bank fundraiser that we do every December at the Highlands here. Mm-hmm. So I'll bring my cash, and probably the most fun part is at the dinner afterwards. You know, it's when we traditionally hand out the skins money and the closest to the pin money. Mm-hmm. And when, you know, somebody's name is Kelly, Harra, you get $25 closest to the pin, and everybody shouts, "Give it back." And so it all gets donated
back
to the charity. So that's a lot of fun because it's just, you know, it's that kind of spirit that everybody throws into it. And so, you know, I know when I pay my skins money tomorrow, I'm never seeing it again.
Yeah.
You know? Even if I win a skin or two, that money's going straight back into the charity, that's why we do the tournament. Yeah. And then they often have auction items up, and so, you know, I might be writing my name down on something or other. So
Let's see if there's anything interesting being auctioned off.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. So other than that, you know, college football coming up this weekend, you know, the start of the bowl games. And, well, heck, you gotta get check the schedule during the week too, because you never know.
Random Wednesday night game.
Yeah, Wednesday night bowl game. Yeah, again, the Hamburger Helper Bowl.
Okay, one of these years there has to be a Hamburger Helper Bowl.
I'm pushing it.
We've already done all the marketing for it. I mean,
yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
With that, I'd like you to like and subscribe. We appreciate every one of you that has come on board on our little journey. We are now approaching 6 months into our podcast history. We started the first week of July. So,
We're getting there.
We're getting there. So, and then you can also listen to us on all these wonderful platforms. If you don't want to look at our faces, which I can understand completely, you can just listen to us. And with that, I'm done.
Okay. Well, we'll see you next week then.
Have a good one.
Bye.